Hello and welcome to our third topic in investigative interviewing. Hopefully you have seen our first two videos, first two topics. The first was the introduction to investigative interviewing and the next was interviewing itself. This topic is going to be split up into two sections, two videos. The first one is going to cover introductory and general content, and the remainder of this first video will also cover verbal signs of deception. The second video, which follows this, will be discussing nonverbal signs of deception. Before getting into the heart of detecting deception, I want to discuss a few things that this video is not. First, it's not about interrogation, as I've mentioned. It's not something I think is well served in an audiovisual format. Also, not every person who we intend to serve with this site needs interrogation. Journalists, for example, would not be well served for that. I also want to take a minute to define what interrogation is. It's not a forced confession. There's no high pressure tactics, heat lamps, yelling, and finger pointing. Those days are gone. This is merely a fact gathering process just like any other. It's an open and neutral exploration with that person that you're interviewing about a potential admission of fact or of guilt that may or may not be there. So that's essentially it. Another aspect of this topic of detecting deception is that the signs of deception are a spectrum, and some are almost always there. Others are there primarily as you begin to chat with the person, but some are only there for interrogation. So we're going to leave those out completely. We're just going to talk about those that you might find when you're talking to somebody, without any necessary understanding that they may or may not be involved in something or other. But the signs of deception will help point that out. We're also not going to tell you whether to record your interview, how to write a report, or how to relay your findings. And last, we're not going to be talking about legal aspects of interviewing. We've already covered some of that in our last video, but we're going to leave that out of this video. Before we get into some of the specific topics on detecting deception, we want to cover four topics that are absolutely crucial to doing this properly. First, we're going to talk about psychological aspects. How does the mind and body work? Then we're going to learn about developing baselines for the subject. Third, in the next slide, we're going to talk about negative clusters. And finally, we're going to address how to remain flexible and open-minded. Note that these four basic general topics apply to verbal and nonverbal signs. So this is going to be useful for our entire series on deception, both videos. First, with psychological aspects, people will exhibit signs of stress based largely on what's happening in their nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is primarily subconscious, and as such is beyond the control of the conscious mind. It controls things like the heart, smooth muscles like blood vessels, and internal glands and organs. This is why many aspects of nonverbal signs of deception will be exhibited without the conscious intent or knowledge of them happening on the part of your subject. The part of the autonomic nervous system we're concerned with is the sympathetic nervous system. This inhibits certain functions that prepare the body for a stressful situation. Peripheral blood flow is constricted, causing blood flow to the skin to decrease, and overall blood flow to the heart and muscles to increase to help the body prepare for flight or fight. Adrenaline is released and blood sugar levels are increased. Heart rate and breathing rate are also increased to allow more blood and oxygen into the system. Feet and hands start to sweat to help cool the body. All of these things occur in an individual who's experiencing stress, usually in the form of fear or anger. And as such, their fear of your detecting their deception will cause them to show certain signs of deception. And you'll see how this opens up as we continue into these videos. Probably the most important thing you can do is to develop a baseline for your subject. Before you try to determine their deceptive behaviors, you want to understand what they're about. Many people exhibit behaviors that look like they are stress indicators or signs of deception, but this just in fact happens to be how they exhibit behavior generally. So the idea is to find out for that person, how do they normally sit and speak and gesture, for example. And the idea is to ask them questions about non-stressful events or commonplace or places where there's not any real particular consequence. So questions like, what did you do? What did you do before you came to the interview today? Or what did you do before the event that you are going to be talking about? Those things are generally inconsequential and will give you a very good idea of the baseline for that person. And then from the baseline, you can look for things that are not consistent with the baseline, that are signs of deception that we're going to be talking about. One other note here, and we have mentioned this elsewhere, is that a person who is drawing from memory that they've actually experienced, that will come back, if you ask them about it, it will come back to them quickly and accurately. This person who's being deceptive, though, is going to be telling lies, and that's drawing from a different aspect of memory, which is harder to keep track of. So if you ask somebody about an event, one good way to tell whether they are telling the truth or not is if you go back over the event again. You'll find it natural, it will come back to them quickly, and the facts will match their previous version. If they're lying, they're going to have to fight to remember what those lies were, and you'll find if they recount the event again, those facts will appear to be inconsistent. The other thing is to talk about that same recounting of an event in different orders. Start from the beginning. Say, well, you mentioned this. Let's go back to the last part you discussed, and then start to ask. It's harder when you jump around the time frame. It's much harder for that person to recall the lies, and you'll start to see inconsistencies. Again, it could be innocent. Some people aren't good with things or don't maybe have a good general memory anyway, but it's one tool you can use if you think you can do it appropriately. That is actually fairly useful. In addition to establishing a baseline as part of your assessment of signs of deception, you want to think about clusters. You should see signs of deception in negative clusters. At least 5. That is to say, of all of the different signs of deception you're going to see in this video and the following one on nonverbal deception, you want to see 5 of them roughly in the same time frame. That's really the only way to get a reliable sense if someone's being truthful with you or not. Also note that the person's baseline, their positive, their non-deceptive, relaxed state comes in clusters as well. So you can play the two off against each other as a way of gauging what's happening. You can also, as you begin to ask questions and you see negative clusters, return to the topic in another way and see if you get more negative clusters that way. That way you can kind of form this path of different ways of coming at the same event or fact to see if you get negative clusters based on that chain of questioning as well. Very useful and very powerful. 5 clusters or more beyond the person's baseline that lead you to believe this person may have something, some involvement. However, those signs, the negative clusters beyond the baseline, could be about something that has nothing to do with your investigation. It could be something peripheral. So, for example, I interviewed somebody one time about an event. Turns out that they weren't involved in the crime. They're actually having an affair, and they didn't want that affair disclosed. So a completely separate thing, had nothing to do with my matter, but they were nervous about something completely different. As well as some people are just nervous about being talked to. How do you feel when a police car drives up behind you? You get nervous. I do. I'm obeying the law, but I get nervous. So the idea, some people are just nervous. That usually starts to wane with time as they begin to realize that there's nothing to worry about. So really the important point here is to, just because you're seeing signs of deception doesn't necessarily mean that it's related to what you're looking into. Now that you understand the basics of the psychological aspects of detecting deception, you know what a baseline is, and you know you want to see signs of deception in a cluster of 5 or more, and you know to remain flexible, we can now get into some specifics. That is to say verbal signals in this video, non-verbal signals will be in the next video. I've bucketed verbal signals into 3 buckets. The first is specific verbal signals. Really, that's just the way a person says no. Very interesting. The other is sort of a catch-all bucket of other verbal responses, and then we'll see how moods affect exhibiting signs of deception. I would also note that generally these responses, these deceptive responses, will most likely come by way of a closed-ended question, where you're looking for a very specific answer, because that's where you're really getting right down to specific aspect of a topic, which is generally more threatening, if you will, or may generate more nervousness in the person if it is a topic that may involve them, their culpability, or some other consequence for them. Simple questions might show this. As you get into an area of discussion, do you know anyone who might know more about this event? Where were you at the time of the event? Who else have you talked to? Do you know why someone might have done something like this? These types of questions might either themselves elicit deceptive behavior, or as you drill down into the topic more. It could come out in an open-ended question, the answer that is, as they get through the explanation. As you hear it, you might see things that where the deceptive behavior is exhibited as they discuss something during their answer that might be part of something they're worried about or concerned about. The most common way that you're going to encounter a verbal sign that is deceptive is when a person literally tells you no. This is the most direct way that they can direct you away from a topic, when they say no and they don't really mean it. What we're going to do is cover 13 signs that are commonly thought of as being signs of deception when a person says no. However, as you'll note as we go through these could just be general ways that people say no. Remember, you have to think about baseline and you have to think about clusters before you draw any particular conclusions. The first is a person who's too friendly. Maybe they're trying to curry your favor or try to convince you that they are nice and that they should be trusted. A person may shift their body after answering when saying no, or cross their legs. This is a sign of discomfort. Shuttering their eyes, blinking a lot, maybe an effort to kind of avoid looking at you. Shaking their head when they say no. Biting their lips, which may be a way subconsciously of stopping their mouth from lying. The appearance of insincerity when a person is distancing themselves from you. Hesitating before answering no, so that they can maybe think about whether they want to lie or not, or having just now been asked a question that calls their culpability into question, they now have to think about their saying no. A breathless no, where there's little breath behind it. This is often done when people engage in freezing behavior, where they freeze their body, their upper torso, their lungs, so that the no comes out as very sort of shallow and breathless. Freezing behavior is an attempt to hide deceptive signs. Appearing thoughtful or too casual. Again, these are signs of either trying to curry your favor or as a way of kind of removing themselves from the from your questioning environment. A person may direct their eyes somewhere else. Again, a method of avoiding you and of perhaps of feeling uncomfortable with looking in the eye when they say no. A blank stare while answering by saying no is a sign that they are involved in some sort of internal dialogue where they are pondering their lie and so forth. Saying no many times in rapid succession to kind of cement what they're trying to say. This next group of verbal responses, 9 of them, are more generic and diverse. And again, you do want to consider the baseline and negative clusters, because some of these things are the way a person might respond or react normally. The first is the untimely explanation. These are responses that are not asked for or premature. This may be an attempt to break the flow away from an uncomfortable topic for the subject. Also note that the truthful tend to answer the questions briefly, while the untruthful will tend to expand and elaborate. Watch for the overly polite subject that's too helpful. This may be an attempt to cause you to trust or like them, or it may be a way for them to try to find out where your investigation is going, or to redirect the topic to something or someone else. The subject may ask you to repeat a question, obviously as a delay tactic while they consider their response. The subject may answer a question with a question, again, to avoid answering your question. The subject may point out how truthful or cooperative they've been. Again, similar to the overly polite, this may be a way to try to get you to trust them and to buy into their deception. Recollection plays an interesting role in this area. When you ask a person to recount an event or a scenario, if they're pulling from memory, they will do so quickly and accurately. So if you go back over it again, they will repeat it quickly, and you'll see very little difference between the details of the first time they explained it to you as compared to the second one. You'll see the details will be the same. However, when a person has been lying, when you ask them about the event, they have to remember what those lies were. They're no longer drawing from their memory. They now have to remember the lies they told. And so the idea is to ask this person to recount the event, but then to repeat it, to go back over it again and ask them about the details. And you'll see that they will trip up. Things won't line up. The details will not be the same. This is where you'll start to see signs of deception. So this is a great way of establishing a person's truthfulness or their whether they're deceiving you or not, because the recollection from memory when they did experience something is going to be quickly remembered and accurately. The person who's lying has to remember their lies and will trip up and then become stressed and show signs of deception and nervousness. Voice, pitch, volume, and rate are all possible signs of stress and deception. The pitch of the voice will rise when a person is under stress, especially compared to baseline. The voice volume can increase or decrease. When a person is angry, this causes a rise in volume. A lowering of volume might be depression, especially as compared to baseline. Voice speed also slows down because the subject might be thinking about what is happening, how to act, and what to say. Speed may also increase as the subject becomes enthusiastic about proving his lies. Speech problems can also show up as the person becomes stressed. Their mind will often have many thought processes going on at once, each competing for their attention. Some things that might happen are the person will leave out words like the, and a. The subject may also leave off the ends of words and work only with the root word, like the word defend could be said as defending, defended, or defends, where they might normally use the word defending. Instead, they will just say the word defend by itself and leave off the end of the word. The person may stop mid-sentence or repeat words. Again, these are all signs that the brain is very active and they are now having trouble forming their sentences and their thoughts in their head. These are, of course, signs of deception. Problems with the voice may also show up here. The voice may crack under stress. They may slur or stutter more than those on their baseline. They'll also use more ums and ahs and hems, as well as perhaps some groans and grunts. This is often used by the subject to stall for time while they consider what they need to do or say. Also notice one thing that I found to be very much the case is what's called dry mouth. A person, as they get into this flight or fight state, their salivatory glands stop producing saliva and their mouth becomes sort of very sticky and pasty, and they sort of have this sort of sticky ticky-tacky sound when they talk. That is very often a sign of somebody who is under stress and someone who's being deceptive. Our last topic in verbal responses that are signs of deception is moods. As you get closer to a topic that's uncomfortable or stressful for the subject, their emotions will kick up. Their anger, their guilt, their fear, their depression. This is especially compared to baseline. And often things you'll see here are the subject will start to swear more compared to baseline. They may decide to attack you or the victim, a witness, or the case facts. Any statement about personal life problems, such as family or health, this may be in an effort to stall, to change the subject, or just to cause you to feel sorry for them or feel bad in a way that maybe they'll start to lighten up on them. Statement about punishments that the subject may receive. This is often seen where a person is starting to decide whether they want to be truthful or not. This really comes up more in interrogation, but I kept it here because it may come up. So the person may ask, well, what would happen to somebody who may be caught doing this, that, or the other? Use of rationalizing words is a way of kind of softening the underlying uncomfortable issue. So if there's a crime being investigated, the the subject will try to refer to the consequences or to the crime or the issue with rationalizing words like almost or sort of or possibly and similar such words. Memory lapses. I don't really remember. Of course they do. This is one we all know. Stalling, laughing or coughing or asking you to repeat questions, shifting the blame, discussing another's culpability. There may be too much attention to little irrelevant details or evading relevant questions. Perhaps completely ignoring incriminating details in the response, or by bumping things up to an overall issue, higher level, as a way of avoiding discussing specifics. They may, of course, avoid your questions, which is an obvious one, and statements which may lack emotion. This may be a state of a person who's detaching or a person who's involved in deep dialogue. Again, we've seen these before, but these are all very important aspects of determining, of seeing verbal responses that could be deceptive. Again, all compared to baseline and as well considered with clusters. That is it for our first video on detecting deception. That is the verbal aspects. We've covered quite a bit here, including the psychological aspects, how to develop a baseline, that you should look for signs of deception in clusters of 5 or more, and understanding this is by no means an exact science, that you need to remain open-minded and consider other factors than just deception. We looked at how the subject says no. We also saw other verbal signs of verbal deception and how moods impact their verbal behavior. We will now look at the nonverbal signs of deception, which is a broader and richer topic actually. It's actually very interesting. Taken together, these topics in these 2 videos, you will complete your understanding of detecting deception, keeping in mind, of course, that signs must be seen in clusters in order to be useful. We'll see you in the next video.